Mark Carney and the Liberal government released a bill today they're calling Bill 5, which is all about making interprovincial barriers less and to build nation building projects. Of course, it's just perfunctory. There's actually no teeth in the bill at all, and it will solve absolutely zero of Canada's problems. Welcome to the Canadian Shield. My name's Sterling. The Liberal government released their bill that they're trying to make everybody excited about over interprovincial trade and how they're going to build a nation building project. They did it on a Friday, which is a telling thing because the one thing these people are always obsessed about is the media cycles, and they know that Friday is typically known as the dumping ground. There's so much stuff going in on Friday that nobody looks at. Had they really wanted you to give it scrutiny, they would have released it on Monday. I think that that's because they hope to have the weekend to take a deep breath. It's going to get really bad. Trump is not coming to the table, obviously. Minister LeBlanc is back in the House of Commons. And I know what Doug Ford said, and maybe Trump is talking to Mark Carney without anybody looking. But I think that we would see some progress, and I don't believe that the progress Mark Carney promised is going to be coming anytime soon. Now, I know that he's claiming he's going to be talking to the guy from China, who he owes $250 million to, so it's a safe bet he could have got a hold of him anytime he wanted. And I know that he talked about this interprovincial bill and how it's going to help build a nation project. Of course, the one question that we ask ourselves is, beyond the pipeline, what is a national project that Canada has that's going to benefit all of us? However, before we get into it, I would encourage you to subscribe and to hit the notification bell. If you like the content, then you would get the content directly into your feed. It helps me get around some of the C11, C18 concerns that Canada has, as well as convinces the algorithm that people are interested in having a look and listen to my content. As I mentioned, the bill is called C5, like Bill C5, and they are talking about free trade and movement of labor, and they're talking about the Building Canada. The bill is broken down into two sections, and of course, on the tail end of the government demanding that they have the right to open your mail without a warrant, we are probably looking at this bill being released because they don't feel like they can get away with doing both. The economic collapse and violating all of your constitutional rights to privacy. So we'll start with this bill because a lot of people are looking at the other bill. That one is going to have a lot more scrutiny. This one is going to be, people are going to be shrugging their shoulders at it because it's really got no teeth in it. But Mark Carney did campaign on it. Of course, what he promised in his campaign and what is actually put down in this bill are not anywhere close to the same thing. All right, so as I mentioned, this bill is split up into two parts, and the first part is called the Free Trade and Labor Mobility in Canada Act. Now, there are a couple of glaring problems with this act. However, there are parts of it that will turn out to be okay for some people in this country. It won't in any way, shape, or form solve the problems, but I'll get into that in a minute. First, let's just listen to the wording because you remember that this legislation is released simply so Mark Carney can hold it up in front of your face and try to say, oh, it wasn't my fault that the economy collapsed. It wasn't my fault that we don't have any money. It wasn't the fact that I'm anti-carbon that did it. It was because I tried, look at the bill, So let's have a look at some of the absurdity of it. Okay, we'll come down to Section 3 where it says the Act and the regulations prevail. The provisions of this Act and the regulations made under it prevail over the provisions of any other Act of Parliament and any regulations made under any other Act of Parliament to the extent of any conflict between the two of them. So anything that this Act offers will have supersede over any of the other interprovincial barriers that may come up in legislation, which of course is not going to be wholly accurate. If that were the case, then we would have no worries about putting in a pipeline anywhere we wanted. We would have no worries about putting any of the products from, say, British Columbia and dropping them into the depressed market of, say, PEI and flooding out their local stuff. I'm getting ahead of myself. The purpose of the Act, The purpose of this act is to promote free trade and labor mobility by removing federal barriers to the interprovincial movement of goods and provisions of services to the movement of labor within Canada, while continuing to protect the health, safety, and security of Canadians, their social and economic well-being, and the environment. Because everybody voted the Liberals, who are environmentalists. So, of course, they're tacking that in there. Now, I don't know how we're going to put the environment against our own well-being. Perhaps that's the idea that the Liberal government figures. If we just, if none of us exist, then perhaps the environment will do whatever it is that they're hoping it will do. I'm not sure, but they added it, and I just wanted you to see how they added it. So now we come down to the goods and the services. It's just section 7, and it's important that we look at the first part. Now, I don't want to overload you with the legislation gobbledygook, but section 7 and 8 apply in respect of a federal requirement only if the federal requirement pertains to a good and service that is also subjected to provincial or territorial requirement. The interprovincial movement of the good or provision of the service. What that means is if both governments have regulations about a person or an item traveling from one state to one province to the other, or one territory to a province, then the provincial legislation will take precedent, and we don't have to worry too much about the federal stuff, which will slow down or will speed up any expedited paperwork, right? Now, section 8.1, the goods, subject to the regulation, a good produced, used, or distributed in accordance with the provincial or territorial requirement is considered to have met any comparable federal requirement. All right. Not bad, right? Good, right? So if we say that the product is safe to sell in British Columbia, then that by default is safe to sell in Newfoundland. All right. Job done. We don't got to ask Ottawa nothing. And you think to yourself, all right, what are you talking about? However, if we come down to number 3, where we see 8, so this would be 8.3, the decision, the federal regulatory body responsible for administration and enforcement of a federal requirement may decide, in accordance with subsection 2, whether a provincial or territorial requirement is comparable to the federal requirement. So that means at any given time, they can decide that the two bodies of legislation don't cancel each other out, and you still have to wait in line for the federal government to give you the okay. I don't know why you would make section 1 if you put in section 3. At this point, that means that on a whim, the federal government can just decide that you have to wait while they examine it. See, that's what they'll do. They won't say, oh, we're making a decision against you right now. They'll say, we're putting it under review. That will be the trick. And then it will sit in limbo while they decide whether or not the legislation of the two provinces matches exactly. It's kind of like when you go to the store and you want to use a coupon, but the product that's in the coupon isn't the same size as the one that you picked up, or it isn't the same. Somehow the flavor is different, and as a result, the coupon might not apply, and they got to go and ask the manager what they think and all of that kind of stuff. It's the same idea, except, of course, that they'll be able to play favorites, right? Like you won't be able to move much into Quebec. The Quebec are very regulated, especially when it comes to their food products. And really, what else are we talking about? Do we want to allow? So are we saying that all the manufacturing in the 1 or 2 places in this country that we allow manufacturing is going to be able to sweep aside all the local stuff? Is that what we're indicating in this legislation? No, of course not. We're always going to have the provincial barriers in place because of the problem. The fact is that we don't have a lot of variation. Now, I get that we shouldn't have much trouble selling Newfoundland fish in Alberta as opposed to the competition coming out of British Columbia. But when you try to tell me that we're going to be selling, beef from Alberta into Ontario, or beef from Alberta into, well, people are going to get upset. Provincial bosses and people that own those jobs, right? Like the union workers and whatnot are going to get in the way. And then all I got to do is call up the federal MP, and the whole thing screeches to a halt while they investigate. We come down to section 9 where they basically change the word goods for services. Now, what would this mean? This would mean that you would be an electrician, or you would be a person who cuts down trees, or any of those kinds of things. And if the legislation in the province, it might not match wholly the legislation of the federal government. Of course, the federal government has the ultimate veto. Again, stopping the problem and only duplicating the problem that we currently have. Now, if it's not enough for you to hear that the minister of whatever the federal minister at any time can say that the rules don't match, so we're going to have a stall while we look at this. They've added number 11, where the governor and council may, on the recommendation of that same minister, make regulations respecting federal barriers to the interprovincial movement of goods and provisions of services and to the movement of labor within Canada, including regulations. Meaning at any time, these guys can write a new law if they want to. So what was the purpose of the bill? That's what, I mean, it's not, there's no purpose to it. It's a stall tactic. It's a design to make you think on the one hand they're doing something, all the while they are doing nothing. They are in fact just getting in the way. At any given time, the prime minister, that's what governor and council means, the prime minister at any given time can veto any of the processes and make a new law stopping any of the interprovincial trade in a moment's notice. We come down to section 12, limitation of liability, and in section 2, for greater certainty. So subsection 2 of section 12. For greater certainty, subsection 1 does not apply in respect to the application of a judicial review. So if the province has decided to take it to court, so that's going to really get things moving, or to proceed under the Chapter 10 of the Canada Free Trade Agreement. So we already have a free trade. We already have a free trade agreement that was written in the 80s. And despite the fact that they said any body of legislation, this document will supersede, it apparently doesn't supersede the Canadian Free Trade, Canadian Free Trade Agreement, or the Prime Minister, or the federal minister. Oh my, yeah. And at this point, you're asking yourself, well, what is the purpose of it? And I too agree with you. What is the purpose of it? And then you think, well, the purpose of it is just to make people who don't pay attention, people who think that they're going to wave a magic wand and fix all of the problems of the last 15 years without any disruption to their current lifestyle. Well, they are going to be able to run around over their Starbucks and say, no, they're doing something. And then these guys will stand up and say, well, it wasn't our fault. Vote for us again. Oh, and then they'll say, Donald Trump. And that'll be the kind of thing that we'll be looking at. Otherwise, tell me in here how those clauses I've just read to you will ensure the smooth flow of products and goods and services between the provinces. Come on, man. As I go into the next one, I'll just say this. The review of the act. Within 5 years, this is section 13, within 5 years after the day on which the act comes into force, the minister must complete a review of this act and its operations and cause a report on the review to be laid before each house of parliament. Each house. So the report will have to go to every province, have to go to the federal government and all of the territories. After 5 years. So you want me, I'm pretty sure we'll know within 5 months. But the way this legislation reads, it amplifies the current situations. It doesn't solve them. We're still going to have Quebec refusing to allow anybody to bring anything into their province. And in Quebec's defense, they have a strong development of their own local economy. So there's that. However, we still have depressed economies in this country that could be trading into different regions. And why should Quebec be allowed to export and not allow anybody to import? That doesn't seem fair from where I'm sitting. And that's just a brief snapshot of the kind of problems that will come from this, especially as the agreement that was drafted in the 80s for free trade between the countries will still have the main precedent. It makes no sense, this bill, except if you want to look at it from the lens of, so who are they trying to fool? Now we'll come to the real farce of this bill, part 2. The Building Canada Act. I'll read you some of the preamble to give you an idea of what they're hoping the message that you're trying to impart. Whereas Parliament recognizes that it is in the interests of Canada's economy, sovereignty, and security, including its energy security, to urgently advance projects throughout Canada, including in the north, that are in the national interest, including projects that foster the development of economic and trade corridors, connect different parts of the country and get goods to market, strengthen Canada's ability to trade, and enhance the development of Canada's natural resources as well as its energy production and infrastructure. So that's what it's trying to convince you this bill is going to show you, right? That it's going to make trade corridors, which I find to be a completely ridiculous term. It's going to make you get parts of the country goods to market. I'm not sure. Anyway, that's the point that frustrates me so much, because these are just talking points that they want to put out on TikTok to try to make everybody think that they're doing something when actually they're doing nothing. Yeah, babe, I'm going to call you. Here we come down to the purpose of the act, right? So this is what, if you were reading the bill and you were looking for an understanding, this would be what it is. The purpose of this act is to enhance Canada's prosperity, national security, economic security, national defense, and national autonomy by ensuring that projects that are in the national interest are advanced through an accelerated process that enhances regulatory certainty and investor confidence while protecting the environment and respecting the rights of Indigenous peoples. So putting us right back to the beginning, because it's the environmental protections that got us into this mess in the first place. It's our economy was really strong, remember. Then all the environmentalists tried to scream that if you cut down, if you mowed your lawn, wow, that was the end of the earth. Never mind what's going on in China. Never mind that Saudi Arabia and many countries in the West, in the Middle East, have only oil coming out of. They don't have nothing else. They only make money off oil, and they supply to the whole world, and they make billions and trillions of dollars. We are not allowed to, cut down a tree because some environmentalist thinks that it's going to change the world. There are 5 factors they've listed as to what project can be approved, and I want you to hear them because they, by their very existence, mean that we can never have a pipeline and we'll never have any oil, and Mark Carney was really just dishonest with a lot of the western part of the country in his campaign trail. Factors, Section 6. In deciding whether to make an order under subsection 1 and 4 in respect of the project, which is earlier back, the Governor and Council may consider any factor that the Governor and Council considers relevant, including the extent to which the project can strengthen Canada's autonomy, resilience, and security. So by having more money, we strengthen the country. Unless you think that in your life, you're going to be, the poorer you are, the better off you are. So why would it in your house change because it's in the country? Provide economic or other benefits to Canada. The more money people have, the better they live. We've just established that. Have a high likelihood of successful execution. There's no guarantees of anything, so that's a ridiculous thing to say. Advance the interests of Indigenous people. I've never in my life met a First Nations individual who thinks being poor is a really good thing. So you just say to them, just cut them in. Here's 10%. We'll build a road. We'll build cell towers. And we're going to put up a magnetic levitation. Everything is going to be hunky-dory. This is the one that puts the nail in it here, though, right? Contributes to the clean growth and meeting Canada's objectives with respect to climate change. Because we're the only government on earth still worried about climate change. And we have 3 of the most fanatical environmentalists in charge of the country. So now that we've established that the Liberal government is trying to tell you they're going to be doing something and then they're making it nearly impossible to get anything done, I'm curious, has anybody come up with an idea on what would be a national project other than the pipeline? Can you explain to me how a windmill in Newfoundland is going to be in the best interest of Canada? Because it's on here. There's a list, 2 segments, that cover all of the bodies of legislation that this national project must jump through. So, as you can see, the acts of Parliament, it's Fisheries Act, Indian Act, International River Improvement Act, National Capital Act, the Canada Navigational Waters Act, Dominion Water Power Act, Migratory Bird Convention of 1994, pretty sure that's no longer relevant, Canada Transportation Act, Canada Marine Act, Canada Environmental Protection Act, Species at Risk Act, Canada Energy Regulatory Act, Impact Assessment Act. So you got to get through all the legislation that's written down there before you can even consider getting on this list. this so-called list. In addition, however, that's acts of parliament. This is regulations. You have to make sure that we can deal with the migratory bird sanctuary regulations, Dominion water power regulations, wildlife area regulation, marine mammal regulation, port authority regulation. Metal and diamond mining affluent regulation, migratory bird regulation of 2022. So not only do we got to worry about the one of 1994, but we also have to worry about the one of 2022. Bit weird. In addition to all of that, we have to deal with the Canada, Newfoundland, and Labrador Atlantic Accord Implementation and Offshore Renewable Energy Management Act. Well, now, for any of you that doesn't know what that is, that's where they put gigantic cement pilings into the bottom of the ocean, and then they use a diesel engine to turn a gigantic windmill that then hums and vibrates to the point that it calls all of the fish that's in the surrounding area toward it, all so that they can take this electricity and split the hydrogen atom off and then sell that hydrogen into Europe. Apparently one of the most expensive forms of hydrogen development there is. Or I guess maybe they're going to send this electricity back on shore, but it is very intermittent. Most of the time, they would just simply be better off to take the electricity from the diesel engine that started the thing, right? Because they all have diesel engines in them. They all have all kinds of problems. Wind energy is the least efficient and the most expensive of all of them. And those buildings, that you think they're going to last forever because you can see a windmill in Holland or something? They're just made of the same stuff we make our cars out of. How long do those last? And these got a lot of moving parts. So this was what they put out there so they could stop trying to develop the oil that's under the ocean off the shore of Newfoundland. Not done yet. The Canada-Nova Scotia Offshore Petroleum Resources Accord Implementation and Offshore Renewable Energy Management Act. So we got to keep the one in Newfoundland in mind, and we got to keep the one in Nova Scotia in mind when we're building a pipeline from Alberta to the Yukon. That's kind of relevant. It's important. I don't know why, but the Liberal government has put it in this legislation. We also have to worry about the Nuclear Safety and Control Act. Now, I kind of agree with this one, except there's not a single nuclear power plant in the whole world that is going to cover the country of Canada from left to right and up and down. In no way, shape, or form are they going to develop a corridor to give you that. So why is it in here? Not sure. I'm really I don't believe that this legislation is ever designed to completely finish a project. I believe that they want to just keep it going for 3 years, and then they'll call an election and they'll do the whole thing all over again. It's easy to see why they introduced this legislation on a Friday. It's further easy what they're going to do is they're going to do the same thing they tried with this 1% tax cut that does nothing to alleviate the economic problems that the Liberal government started. But they will say, oh, look, the Conservatives voted against this ridiculous bill. This bill that gives all the veto power to the Prime Minister of Canada, and none of the provinces have a say whether or not the project be looked at. What we need is the same thing that they're talking about in Alberta. I don't want to be talking about separation, though I do hear from a lot of people. Based on the number 51 that I get in my comments, there is a lot of people. I think the last one I looked at, it's close to 60% of Alberta. And once they read this act, oh my, there's nothing that's going to convince people they should live in poverty, especially when you have people like Mark Carney who say, you live in poverty, you live in high density, I will get into my chauffeur-driven car, fly to my private jet. Then I will take that jet to many different countries around the world, and I will bring that jet back, and I will tell you that you have not done enough to live green. And we know that. We see it. He does it all the time. He's already done it like 3 or 4 times since he's been elected leader of the Liberal Party, which the day that he did that, he became the Prime Minister. However, in the United States of America, when you cast your vote, like in the case of Trump and Harris, they just had their election, and there are other questions on the ballot, which is what the only real thing that Danielle Smith is offering is just a lower population requirement to have any question you want put on the ballot, and the mainstream media is losing their mind over it because it gives a lot of control and a lot of influence to the people. And remember, the politicians, especially the left politicians, they do much better when there's no change. They do, living inside of the status quo is where they do their best, because they don't have to do anything there. And they just run around and say buzzword, buzzword, buzzword. Nothing gets done except for they continue to collect the $200,000 a year and write off all their food and gas and all the rest of it. Now, we need this kind of a thing added to the ballot in Canada, because for our federal, we could be saying, do you want a pipeline? Do you want a road that runs from, pick a two cities? The people get the idea, then they get you put it out as a petition, and then people sign in support, and then that gets to be put, if it hits a certain threshold of signatures, it gets to be put on the ballot question. It's called a ballot question. It's done all over the United States. They do it locally, like municipally. They do it statewide. And we in Canada need to also be doing that, which is what Danielle Smith is operating under when she talks about having the numbers changed. Currently in Alberta, they already have this system, except for the numbers are very high. The threshold is very high. So she lowered that number, or at least she put the legislation forward to have that number lowered to be 10% of the population of Alberta. Now there are people out there, it just happened to be like this what do they call that? The perfect storm kind of thing, where people are upset about about Mark Carney and not allowing them to have good jobs and good pay. And they look over at Saudi Arabia, they see, Lamborghini in every driveway, and they think in their mind, well, we could be having that if we simply get the federal government out of the way. At the same time, Danielle Smith wants this referendum question, or this ballot question, to be allowed onto the ballot so that the population of Alberta will have more of a say. It could be anything. It doesn't have to be such a profound question. That's the thing I'm trying to get you to understand. It doesn't have to be, should we separate? It could simply be, should we build a new highway overpass at such and such? Should there be a bridge put in here and here? And then you just say yes or no. And then they take those numbers and then they put them in front of the government, and they say, okay, the people want this. The people want a pipeline running from Alberta all the way through Churchill. They want a magnetic levitation running from Alberta to Churchill to Nunavik to Whitehorse to Yellowknife, and then, in all the other parts of the country that we should be having one. The point is that we have the right as a people to put the question on the ballot if we can get enough people to agree. And then the politician takes the ballot and they see which way the people voted. That is the only way we're going to get anything done. We have to remove these decisions from these people, because they don't make decisions in the best interest of everybody. Once they get their vote from you, it's just like Pierre Poilievre described. Now that they have your vote, they're going back to exactly the people that they were. It's just the same as when you're dating that guy and he says, yeah, baby, don't worry, I'll never do it again. And then as soon as you come back home, boom, he's the same guy. He's, leaving his socks on the floor and whatever it is. Like it's the same personality type. And anybody who cast their vote for the Liberal Party thinking that it would be different was duped, fooled, tricked. But we have a real need in this country, and I believe that we also have the momentum for some of these larger projects that could take the power away from the Prime Minister, take the power away from the Environment Minister, take the power away from all of these people and give it back to the power back to the people themselves. So if you get enough people on the thing and the ballot question goes your way, yes, we all want a pipeline, then the government can't do anything. There's no acts, there's no this, there's no that, there's none of that foolishness. There's just, okay, here's the check. Let's get shovels in the ground. Now, I believe that we shouldn't make the water dirty. Obviously, I believe that we should look out for the wildlife. Obviously, that's why I don't believe in high-speed rail, because high-speed rail is billions of tons of concrete, and, the wildlife can't migrate. A pipeline, however, is buried. So anything, like you bury it.
It's just like a sewer system. It's just like the water that comes into your house is buried in the ground. You'll never see it. So it's ridiculous to think in your mind that it's a problem. Now, you might see it in Nunavik because they have the permafrost. So that's a thing. But I'll leave that to wiser people than me to figure out. What I need you to focus on is this bill was put forward to help Canada solve its economic woes right now. Not 5 years from now, not 3 years from now. Right now. What are you doing right now? While young men have no future with an apartment, while young women also don't have that kind of money to make a condominium purchase, where they're running out of jobs, where they're, all the problems that are plaguing Canada when it was Justin Trudeau are still plaguing Canada now. In fact, they're much worse in some cases because the dollar has dropped considerably, as I told you it would. I don't want to mix two storylines going on here. I just wanted to break down this joke of a piece of legislation. There's nothing in it that could get anything done, and there's a million things in it that could stop even the greatest of ideas. And the decision maker at the top of it all is Mark Carney and Stephen Guilbeault. So where in your mind do you think that while they make hundreds of thousands of dollars a year off of your sweat, they're going to allow you to have anywhere near the kind of job that they think is a problem for Canada, but not for China or for Mark Carney personally? All right, I'm going to wrap here. Let me know down in the comments if you think the Bill C-5 will solve some of our economic problems, or do you think that it's just a farce, an effort to try and make people think something's happening when it's really not? Thank you for listening. I'll talk to you next time.